Well, obviously we have certain issues here. We have kind of loan to value issues, which I'm sure you've heard about. I mean, what are solutions that we need to come before we can get investors like you to start dumping lots of money in?
Well, we're ready to buy a business here tomorrow. I mean,
Okay.
I tried to buy Dan on April 1st, but then it turned out he had his fingers crossed.
Well, you're stuck on the name.
But
right?
April 2nd, I called you. You didn't answer the phone.
No, we've actually come reasonably close to a few in the past. I mean, quite a ways past. But anytime they come, if the phone rings tomorrow and they're calling from Detroit, believe me, I will be taking it.
Okay. Give us kind of a hint of what you're going to say up there. Why are you bullish
I
on
don't know.
Detroit?
I'm just interviewing him.
He's
so
good
those
at
questions.
quiz, yeah.
Well, then why are you bullish on Detroit?
Well, stay around and listen to the. I don't want you to miss the.
Let's talk a little bit here about Detroit. What is your view? What happened here from the outside looking in?
Well, the biggest thing, the finances got out of hand, and that's happened to plenty of cities before. 40 years ago in New York, it was on its back, and the President of the United States actually said that New York dropped dead. There was a famous
He didn't
headline.
mean it though, right?
No, but they felt he meant it in New York. It was a headline in the New York Daily News. President of New York dropped dead. But the city they lost their credit, and everybody was fighting with everybody else. The unions, the politicians, the bankers, the business people. They were all mad at each other. But they sat down and they actually worked out a solution that was like a bankruptcy, but it wasn't an official one. They set up something called Big Mac, and Felix Roden was involved, but Victor Gottbahn from the unions was involved, and they worked out something that made sense. Now it didn't transform things in a day or a week or a month, but just look what's happened. I mean, cities, they have an inherent strength and vibrance. I mean, you've got great headquarters. Companies in Detroit, and that's enormously important. It's been important in Omaha, but
Speaking of headquarters, if I had done my research correctly, your funds or one of your funds under Berkshire owns 2% or something of General Motors, and you guys just added to the position.
yeah, we've got two fellows that one of whom we hired maybe 3 to 4 years ago, and the other one 2 to 3 years ago. I hired them. When I hired them, they managed $1 billion each, but I've kept giving them more money to manage.
Sooner or later, that adds up, billions.
Yeah, well, they're up to $9 billion apiece now,
Yep.
and when I'm not in the picture, they'll be running a couple $100 billion.
That's not
and they're
for
terrific guys.
Go ahead.
But one of them has about close to 15% of his fund in General Motors stock. And actually, when Mary Barra came out 3 or 4 months ago, this fellow's name is Ted Weschler, and the three of us went out to lunch. And
How'd that go?
well, I was enormously impressed with her, and as I drove her down in my 2000, probably a little Freudian slip there, my 2006 Cadillac, I said, Mary, is the new one any better than this? Well, I got a rather fulsome answer to that, and so the next day I told my daughter, I said, go out and buy me one of these new Cadillacs, and I wrote Mary about it later. But Mary is, I mean, she is a real car guy. I will tell you that. You can just tell. I mean, she has a.
It looks like a car guy. Yeah.
She has a passion for it.
Yep.
I love it when CEOs have a passion for their business. It's enormously important. I mean, if I had a one-line employment form, I'd almost say, "Are you passionate about what you do?" Because it works, and she really is, and she knows cars forwards and backwards. She's really good.
So, what is your view overall of the Detroit automobile makers, and now post-bankruptcy? What's their future look like?
The American public, of course, worldwide too, but when I was 16, I was only thinking about two things: cars and girls. I wasn't very good with girls, so it kind of narrowed it down a little bit. But although if you had the right car, it helped with girls too.
That's true.
I mean, Americans love cars. They're in love with their cars, and it all started here too. So there's really nothing more quintessentially American than the car. And I think people feel that the world over. They're driving American cars.
But you probably wouldn't have bought 2% of General Motors 7, 8 years ago, right? What from an investor standpoint changed that at least you allowed your guy, or he decided to?
Well, it's his decision.
His
I should
decision,
say
okay.
that. But the car business, it got rationalized to some degree by what it went through a few years ago. But they'll always sell a lot of cars. Predicting who's going to sell them and how much money they're going to make per car is another question.
Yep.
But we're going to sell, it's going to be almost 17 million cars this year, and that was down around 9 and a fraction, not that long ago.
Yeah.
The American public will always love cars. You can always get people's eyes to light up if you show them a new car.
Do you think the U.S. federal government should have bailed out General Motors?
Yeah, I publicly, on March 6th, 2009, I was asked that question on CNBC, and you can look up the answer. I wouldn't have guessed I would have given that answer maybe 30 or 40 years ago.
Yeah.
But it was so clear to me in 2009 that, A, it would work, because you want to do something that's going to work. But the idea that you should let the financial condition, of the company destroy it when you had so much going for it over time. And it was so important to America, and you get into parts suppliers and dealers and finance operators. I mean, it would have been a death blow, in my view, if Washington had thumbed its nose at the car companies then. And so I declared myself publicly on that. And the country, if you think of what would have happened, it didn't cost them anything in the end, speak of anyway. If you think of what would have happened if they made the other decision, you could write a book about it. What if the government had said no? Yeah. It would not be a pretty story.
I don't know if we'd be sitting here right now.
No, that's right.
Yeah.
I actually give a lot of credit. You can argue about how we got in all the trouble we did in 2008 and 9, and there were plenty of blame to go around and all of that. But once September 2008 hit, I was not a Bush supporter, but Bush did the right thing. And you had Bernanke, and you had Paulson, and you later had Geithner, and you had Obama. Those people did what was in the interest of the country. Now I said it was a lot like Pearl Harbor. Maybe those ships shouldn't have all been in the harbor.
Right.
But once the attack came, there was no sense the Army blaming the Navy for having too great a concentration and the Navy getting defensive. I mean, we had a war on it, and we had a survival war for the economy going on.
How does this work for so all of us? So it's 2008. The world is melting down. Does President Bush or Obama, or I guess at that time Bush or Geithner, you getting calls in Omaha? Is it ringing off the hook? What's going on in your office in Omaha?
Well, people that are looking for money call.
Okay. Just like, hey, Warren, country's going down.
How's my favorite guy in Omaha?
And your assistant.
I started looking like George Clooney.
Debbie, who I've met several times, and she's, I got a flavor of who works for who backstage there. Does she screen? Will she screen the price? Say, no, I'll get back to you, Mr. President. I mean, how does it work?
If she does that, I haven't heard about it.
Okay.
No, but it was interesting because George Bush, and I give him enormous credit for this. I didn't vote for him, but he came out and he issued the 10 most important words in the history of economics. I mean, Adam Smith back in 1776 talked about the specialization of labor, the invisible hand, and you had Keynes talk about animal spirits and all these things. George Bush came out on the White House lawn and he said, if money doesn't loosen up, this sucker can go down. Now, that is a great academic statement.
That was. I'd sort of be interested to see the first version of that before they.
Yeah, well,
because they agreed on that one. They said,
but he, in effect, he let both the Treasury, and of course he doesn't have control over the Fed, but nevertheless, the Fed has to be in sync. But Bernanke and Paulson could then say, we'll do whatever it takes. If you remember, when the American public really got scared was when money market funds broke the buck.
Yep.
35 million Americans at the start of September, thought $3.5 trillion of their money was safe in money market funds. And then in 1 week, they got worried about it. And 175 billion flowed out of money market funds in 3 days in mid to late September. And that was just starting. It's an interesting thing. The Treasury, Hank Paulson, in effect guaranteed money market funds at that time. He did it with something called, I forget the currency or the economic stabilization fund. That was a fund that was set up in 1934 when we changed the price of gold. And we had a profit because we changed the price of gold. So we just stuck it in this fund at that time. Nobody ever dreamt it would be used for guaranteeing money market funds. I'm not sure that the authority existed to do it. But the right thing to do was to do it.
Did somebody back there, some lawyer, say, hey, there's this 1934 thing we can do, or did they just do something and then rely back?
I think they just decided they had to do it.
Yeah.
And if they had to call it, soybean support stuff, they would have gone to the soybean funds. I mean, but you needed that then. There was nobody but the whole American public and American business needed to deleverage. And there was only one party that could leverage up, and that was the U.S. government, and they did it right, and I took my hat to them.
So speaking of guaranteeing big entities and big potential calamities, and we saw that in essence, the federal government did that with New York City in the 70s. Do you think Detroit should have been, in essence, bailed out of the bankruptcy? Would that have been better for the country and for the city?
Well, I think as long as the bankruptcy is handled fairly quickly, bankruptcy is fine. I mean, that is how you clean the slate. General Motors went bankrupt. They did it in a hurry. It was prepackaged in effect, but they got rid of some things that shouldn't have been done in the past, and they made themselves competitive for the future. And now they're employing I don't know how many thousands of people. So one way or another, if you make terrible mistakes in the past, you can do it as an individual. I mean, millions of people do it, and they make a mistake, and the world allows you to clear the slate, and you don't do it without cost. But it was important that Detroit clear the slate, and it looks to me like they're doing it promptly, and I salute you for it.
So you told me something interesting a few months ago. Warren was in Detroit in November of just last year for the launch of the Goldman Sachs 10,000 business thing, and we were driving you back to the airport, and you said something to me about, you see that bridge over there? And I said, yeah. I almost bought that bridge one day. And he was talking about the Ambassador Bridge.
Yeah.
I was pretty shocked about that. Can you tell? I think everybody would be interested in hearing how that, because you might have been a pretty good owner for that bridge, come to think of it. But, so tell us.
Maddie's made me look good.
So what exactly? I was shocked to hear that. I did not know that.
Well, what happened, when I got out of school in 1951, I took all the Moody's manuals, and there were 4 or 5 of them, the industrials, the banks, and finance, about 10,000 pages. And I was 20 years old then, and I just turned the page, and I went through and looked at every company for 10,000 pages. And it was in the transportation manual, interestingly enough. They had both the Detroit International Bridge, and they had the Detroit and Canada Tunnel. Yeah. And those were both quite interesting. So I started following them. And then in the 1970s, we bought a fair amount of stock in the bridge. There was a fellow named Phil Correa at Pioneer Fund owned a fair amount. They actually put my partner Charlie Munger on the board, and I think we got up to 20-odd%. And the Canadians were kind of holding us up on that at that point. There was, I think there was something called FIR, the Foreign Investment Review Act, and they just held it up long enough so that Matty got interested, and he came in and started bidding against us, and he ended up owning the bridge.
Oh yeah, that's too bad.
As I understand, the tolls went up just a little bit after that.
Yeah. Oh, there hasn't been any issues in the last 4 or 5 years.
I remember at the time when we looked at it, the tunnel was terribly crowded, so it didn't really look like you could handle much more capacity with the tunnel, whereas the bridge is one hell of a bridge.
Right. In reading your books over the years, that's always sort of been a thing with yours, almost metaphorically and actually literally bridges, toll booths, things like that. Where did that thinking actually come
Yeah,
from?
well, it was in a, there were not a lot of other ways to cross. You had this unusual situation where half of it was in Canada and half of it was in the United States, which complicated things. As I remember, this goes back 40 or 50 years, but as I remember, there was a liquor store there, that was just tiny, that was making a fortune. I don't know which side of the bridge it was on, but that's the closest I've ever come. I own about a quarter of a bridge, but owning a quarter of a bridge really doesn't quite do the job. I mean,
No, it doesn't. What is your view of what Detroit has to do to get the confidence or keep building the confidence of people outside Detroit, or even, we have a bunch of what we're terming as expats here. I don't know if I totally like that word, because I think most people are tied to Detroit in some way, shape, or form, and you don't want to make people feel otherwise. But how do you continue to gain the momentum for particularly people who have nothing to do with Detroit?
Yeah, well, headquarters companies are terribly important. I mean, the cities get, in the business world, somewhat identified by headquarters cities. I think athletic teams are very important in terms of just the spirit of a town. And
there's one in Cleveland, that they got a pretty good player. So that's,
is that right?
Yeah. But
what was his name?
But what is there anything that we all could do, or that you see different from the outside? Again, being an astute investor like you are, is there any kind of actions that could be taken or should be taken, do you think?
I think when you do look, you do look at headquarters now. You look at transportation. You look at philanthropy within a town to see just how much the citizens of the town care about their own town. There are a number of variables like that. We've looked at, in fact, we've had a contract virtually to buy one business up here, and as you mentioned, we almost bought the bridge. We've looked at others. I mean, we would buy a company in Detroit today, and we'd be happy to have the headquarters here.
Would you have said that 5 years ago, 3 years ago, 10 years ago?
Well, it's much better after the bankruptcy than before. I mean, if you see a bankruptcy coming, that is not encouraging.
Yep.
If you were a parts supplier to an auto company, you'd have worried plenty.
Yep.
In early 2009. I mean, your destiny would depend on what happened with somebody. So, but that's past. And so you've got prosperous home office companies here. I mean, a company like your own, you're going to be employing a lot more people 5 years from now or 10 years from now. I'll put it this way: you bought a lot of real estate around here.
Yeah, a little bit.
If you want to sell me half of it at your cost, I'll take it. You got witnesses out there.
Well, maybe, it depends what we throw in with it. That might be, casinos and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so
I kind of like those safe deposit boxes in the basement of the Bank of the Commonwealth building.
That's true. Actually, that's a true story. We took Warren for a tour, and down at the Chrysler House, which was the Dime building, they preserved these old safety boxes, and so you want to open up a few at a time, because it's not like the Geraldo Rivero thing where there's nothing in it. So he opens it up. There's the only guy. There's $1 in there. No one else. It's a true story.
Yeah.
The only guy that found the $1.
Dan wanted to sell me the whole group of unopened boxes, and of course he had this one fake box that he'd already opened. He put a whole bunch of money in that. They call that salting the mind.
So, oh man. Okay, so let's talk about this concept of coming home. There's this concept of coming home. All these people, in essence, here, these very successful people in the room, a lot of them, come home. You stayed in Omaha. You never moved to New York permanently as your primary home. And there's another guy I mentioned him earlier. Went from that glitz all down in South Beach and decided to come home. Do you think that's becoming more of a trend? Or I guess that's the first question. Why didn't you ever move out of Omaha?
I could live any place I want, and I could do business any place I want, and I could not live better than I live now. Yeah. I could spend more money than I spend now. I bet the cost of living and the standard of living, up to a certain point, correlate pretty well.
But I'm going to make an assumption that's not why you didn't move out of Omaha.
Well, but I'm in a house I've been in now for 56 years, That's about a quarter of the lifetime of the country. 1/4 of the lifetime of the country. My kids grew up there. They were happy there. Our house was kind of a neighborhood center. The kids all came over. Now, 50 years later, when my daughter's friends come back town, they want to come to the house. They want to see me wandering around in a bathrobe eating popcorn just like they did 50 years ago. It's 5 minutes.
Were you eating popcorn in the bathroom?
In the bathrobe.
Oh, bathrobe, I'm sorry.
I'd be in there going through these Moody's manuals looking at Detroit International Bridge.
I got you.
But I'd wander in, make some popcorn, and they went to the same schools, public schools, that my father went to. Their kids have gone to those schools. Their grandchildren have gone to, my grandchildren have gone to those schools. There's a continuity of life. You know the people. You know the doctors. You know everything about it. And they're good experiences. Now, if I move out to Palm Springs or something like that, I may have great neighbors too. I'll probably never know them. I mean, in my zip code, there are over 100 shareholders of Berkshire Hathaway. I'm with friends as long as the stock's up anyway. I mean,
probably going to take you to dinner.
When you've got 100 shareholders in your zip code, I mean, when you go out trick-or-treating, you do all right. I mean,
that's good. So Warren, you've been known to have some great quotes over the years, and I wrote down a few of them, and a few of them are you can understand just on the face of it, no problem. But there's a few that may need a little bit more explanation. You may get that. So I want to can I give you a few of them? Okay, so this is one of my favorites here. It says, "You can't produce a baby in 1 month by getting 9 women pregnant."
Yeah.
So what does that mean?
It means that there's some things that can't be hurried up. Like building a brand or something of the sort.
Okay.
I mean, you can't build a brand in a week or a month. I mean, there's some things you have to set out to do that that there's a given timetable to, and you've got to be willing to play it through to the end. And you won't necessarily have somebody declaring you the winner 10% along the way or 20%. Berkshire's an example of that. I mean, we had a bunch of terrible textile mills, and it took real time to bring in other businesses and develop them and develop acquaintances with people that sell us businesses and so on. So it's very important to realize the time horizon, the natural time horizon of the task you set out to do. And if you can't stand that time horizon, forget about getting on that, on that particular task.
Why do you think there is such a impulse for people to have to trade in and out of their investments and trade in and out of whatever it is, bonds or commodity? I mean, do you think it's the thrill of it? Because you can look at all the great philosophies that you've had, but probably, and correct me if I'm wrong, because you do a better Warren Buffett imitation than anybody I know.
I hope so.
Yeah.
So I want to get imitating my signature on checks.
But I would say it's the ability to stay with your conviction and hold on, and because you believe in the business. That one concept itself seems to be elusive for so many people. Why do you think that is?
It's so simple too. I mean, if you were looking at a small private business in Omaha and you had some money to buy into, maybe it's a McDonald's stand, maybe it's a dry cleaning establishment,
big furniture store.
What would you think about? You wouldn't think about, what Janet Yellen's going to say next week, or something. You wouldn't be listening to the chatter on TV. You'd be thinking about the competitive advantage you might have, who might compete with you, what the return on capital is, what kind of a partner you're going to have in running it, all of the things that are fundamental to a business. Yeah. The biggest problem most people have is they don't think about a stock as being a part of a business. Mm-hmm. Now, when they buy a farm, they think they're buying a farm, and they say how many bushels of corn will it produce, or how many bushels of soybean will it produce in an average year? What are the taxes? What do I have to pay the tenant farmer? They look at it as an actual farming business. When they buy an apartment house, they say, what can I rent it for? How much vacancy will I have? What will it cost me to manage it? How often do I have to replace the roof? All of that. They look at it as a business. But when they look at a stock, a lot of people, when they look at a stock, they just look at it as something that people say may go up, or maybe it'll split next week, or or somebody's got a target price on it. Can you imagine having a target price on a farm or an apartment house? It's crazy. Yep. So the key thing is to think about a stock as a part of a business. Just forget about the stock part.
Do you think people don't, or the vast majority of people don't, because just because you can trade it? Because
Yeah,
it's-
exactly.
it's-
Liquidity
that's-
makes them do stupid things.
Yeah.
The very fact, liquidity, which should be your friend.
Yes.
The fact that you can get out of it 10 minutes later, which you can't do with a farm or an apartment house,
Yeah.
that should be your friend. But they turn it into a negative. My old boss, Ben Graham, talked about having a partner named Mr. Market. And Mr. Market, you know, when you own a stock, Mr. Market comes around every day. Let's say it's General Motors. And he names you a price at which you can either buy more from him or you can sell to him. Now imagine having a McDonald's stand and you got one partner. And that partner comes around and someday they're building a Burger King across or a Kentucky Fried and he gets pessimistic. So he names a low price because he's afraid you're going to sell to him. So you buy from him. And other days he comes around, there's a big long line of cars in the drive-in. The other guy's shut down across the street, so he thinks he better name a high price because otherwise you might buy from him. So you get this very erratic partner who gives you a price every day, which you can ignore if you wish. But if he says something silly, you take advantage of him.
Yep.
Now, what kind of a partner do you want then? You want some psychotic drunk, you know, because you want some guy that wanders all over the place, you know, and gets all enthused and all depressed.
Yep.
But you never forget that you're buying the business, and he is the guy that's wandering around in a crazy way. But stocks, you put your finger on it, because they're so liquid. People think they have to make a decision every day because they can make a decision, and it's crazy. Also, there's a propensity of people to gamble.
Yep.
I mean, when I was 21, I went on my honeymoon. My wife was 19. We went through Las Vegas, and it was 1952. And we stopped at the Flamingo, which was then kind of a motel-like structure. And I went in, and I saw all these well-dressed people most of whom had come 1,000 miles or so, and they've come to do stupid things. And I looked around, and I thought, boy, am I going to get rich. You know? I mean, imagine going 1,000 miles to throw a bunch of dice where you know you're going to lose money over time if you keep doing it.
Yep. It's
and
the thrill.
And those people are making decisions in the stock market, and they set prices, and all you have to do is every now and then look at one and say, wait, that doesn't make any sense in terms of where it's selling. I mean, people were paralyzed at the end of 2008. I mean, they were just plain scared. Treasury bills went to a negative yield. Imagine that.
Yep.
I mean, you could put the money under the mattress and get a higher yield than you got on a Treasury bill. Yep. When that's going on, you got to be out there with a great big tub. When it's raining gold, you do not want to be out with a teaspoon.
Yep.
You want to be out there with a
Yep.
big ladle. You know?
So I'm never going to forget that last 5 seconds for the record. It's just etched in my mind already, I can tell. You know, you've said mispriced at the beginning when you were talking about the Nebraska game, and then you sort of alluded to it right now. What % of your wealth, success, whatever you want to call it, do you think is attributable to mispriced, and what % is just attributable to you guys doing the work, doing the research, and loving the business?
Well, you've got to do the second to know when it's mispriced.
True.
Yeah. So if I look at, well, just take the Ambassador Bridge in 1970. My guess is, this is way back, but you were probably getting pre-tax 15% returns on if you bought the Ambassador Bridge. Now here's something that, you know, is a necessity, and you know the auto parts are going to flow back and forth, and even if you had just small increases over that, that was a great investment, you know, and that wasn't because I'm any genius or anything. I mean, anybody that knew anything, you know, but I looked at it as a business, and other people would look at it and say, well, the stock hasn't done anything for a couple of years. Well, who cares whether their stock's done anything for a couple of years? I mean, I don't care. I don't know whether my farm has done anything for a couple of years. I know what it can produce. So you got to look at it as a productive asset and not as something that wiggles around on a piece of paper.
Do you get a feeling like when 2008 or other times where the market's just been irrationally sold off? Is this a golden gut feeling, or is it just, you know, is it all of a sudden you look at a bunch of numbers and it goes, how do you come to the point where you're saying that day that you call it whatever, raining gold, how do you know it's a raining gold day?
Well, you don't know that it won't rain more gold the next day. I was early.
Okay.
The market hit bottom in March of 2009, and I invested a lot of money in it. So you never know what the market's going to do. I haven't the faintest idea what the market's going to do next week or next month, and I don't think about it. I don't know what farm prices are going to do next month. You know, I mean, you've got to focus on where it's likely to be in 5 years or 10 years, and you can't predict market fluctuations. And if you think you can, you know, you get in trouble. So that day in September, when Goldman Sachs called me and they said, we need $5 billion, I might have been able to drive a much better deal the next day or the next week or next month. I just looked at the deal that was being offered to me, and I said, this makes sense. And I don't worry about the fact I could have made a better deal a week later.
How many stocks do you, well, I don't want to say stocks, companies. You have this other quote that you use, I don't want to get the words exactly, right, I won't get them right now. But you said something like diversification is for people who don't do their homework or something like that. I may have it a little bit wrong, but your point was...
Diversification is a protection against ignorance.
That's even
and which
better.
is not, and there's nothing
Much
wrong with
better.
that. I mean, at all. I mean,
Yep.
if you don't follow companies and businesses and you want to invest in the American economy, it makes a lot of sense to buy an index fund. I mean, it makes the most sense because you don't know that much about specific companies, but you do know that America is going to be way ahead economically 10 and 20 and 30 years from now, and that's a way to own a slice of it.
And how do you feel about America, 5 years, 10 years? I mean, I know there's sort of these unprecedented challenges. I guess maybe every generation in some way, shape, or form feels like they're having unprecedented challenges. But
no, this is nothing. We had a civil war. Just imagine that. I mean, if you go back to 1776, just imagine, just drive from here to Cleveland or drive anywhere you want to, and think of what it looked like. It was nothing. Nothing. Now, there were 4 million people around then. We're not smarter than they were. We don't work as hard as they do. But something has changed. Everything that's up here is profit, basically. I mean, a given person may own a house where they owe the money to the bank, but somebody's got the money in the bank that lent it to them. As long as it's not owned internationally, this whole country, is what's been created in a very short period of time, less than 240 years. And it's an amazing. During my lifetime, I was born in 1930. Since I was born, the real GDP per capita in inflation-adjusted
Can we just
terms.
clarify one thing in that? I really, something I've always, what is a capita?
And
People say per capita, is that per household, per person?
No, it's per person, per person.
How come they don't say per person? They just say capita. Is that a business school? Where I've always, no, I'm serious. It's one of these things I've always wanted to know.
I probably won't go to sleep tonight worrying about that, actually.
I mean, like Warren Buffett's here. I figured I'd ask you that question. Per capita.
No, you stay up tonight worrying about it. I'll think about other things.
Okay.
But per capita.
Per capita.
There's 50,000 of GDP per capita.
Okay.
That is 6 times, in real terms, what it was when I was born. One person's lifetime. 6 for 1.
And that's inflation adjusted.
That's inflation adjusted. That is what this system produces. Our system unleashes human potential like nothing ever has. I met 64 people over there that have taken the course for the 10,000 small business. Those people have just started to use their potential, and it's going to blossom into things. If you go back to 1790, we had 4 million people. The Chinese had about 300 million. They were just as smart as we were. They worked just as hard. Their soil was more or less the same and everything. And yet, a couple hundred years later, we had 25% almost of the world's output, and they had far, far less, even though they had far more people. It wasn't because we were smarter. It's because we had a system that unleashed human potential. And that game has just begun. I mean, we've got there's no surer bet than that America's economic progress will continue at a good clip. It may not include everybody. That's a different question. Now, how it gets distributed is another question. But the overall pie is going to grow.
Speaking of wealth being created, one of the things that I've come across anyway, especially over the last 5 to 10 years, talking to young people, colleges, even small business people, even people who work at big companies, the concept of wealth being created. Do you think we cover that enough in the education and school systems? Because I'm not sure that everybody totally understands. I'm not sure I even totally understood it maybe until 10 years ago, that literally it gets created. There's sort of this view maybe that there's a limited pie and maybe the government creates it or something that gets split up every year.
It's not a limited pie.
No, how do we though as a country or city or state, how do we get that message across? Because once it's across, then everybody says, well, if it gets created, then I can create it.
Yeah, I don't worry too much about it when I see those 64 people I saw this morning.
Was incredible.
They are all out trying to improve the lot of themselves and their families. And they will be thinking, when I was at McClure's Pickles, last night, those guys are thinking about how they can have new customers, new products, how they can turn it out, how they can have fill those jars faster, how they can have a better product, all the time. Just like Henry Ford was thinking, 100 plus years ago about how that car could come down the assembly line faster. The incentives in a market system really drive more and more output. They don't do it with every single person, but they do it with enough people that the pie will continue to increase.
So let's talk about that issue you just raised about the wealth, and sometimes people use the word distributed. I'm not so sure, or gets created in different places. Whatever word you use, how do we get more people maybe that have been minorities or are minorities, and people who've been economically depressed or whatever for maybe even generations, or people aren't as educated as other people? How do we break that? How do more and more people become participants in this great system?
Well, you certainly want to have equality of opportunity. You want everybody to have a shot. We wrote the Declaration of Independence in 1776, and we said all men are created equal. Then in 1789, we wrote a constitution which said blacks were 3/5 of a person, and which treated women in many cases. If you read Article 2 of the Constitution about the presidency, the male pronoun is used throughout it. I mean, they sort of gave themselves away there, and it took until 1920.
The male pronoun? Is that
What's that? Yeah, well, they didn't do it with the House of Representatives. They didn't do it with judges.
Okay.
But with the presidents, they kind of slipped in, and they referred to him and he and a few times. This was only 13 years after Jefferson said we're all created equal. But
and so far they've been right. Probably unfortunately.
Well, until the 19th Amendment, 1920. I mean, women were officially second-class citizens, and even then, it's taken a long time. So that makes me enormously bullish on America, because I think we are going always in the right direction. And I think if you look at what we accomplished using half our talent, up till 1920, just think what we can do with all of our talent.
Yeah.
So this country's got a long, long way to go.
Is there anything, policies? Is there anything, even businesses who have a lot of businesses have a lot of power. They have a lot of influence, a lot of leverage. Is there, whether it's compulsory or not compulsory, is there anything that you think should be done or could be done, or that to speed that process up? I mean, what we saw this morning was an example. I mean, for those of you that weren't there, Goldman Sachs, their 10,000 businesses. I have to tell you something. We've been in Detroit now 4 years and 1 month, so 49 months. The 30 minutes that I watched this graduation of these 64 businesses, and the passion and enthusiasm and excitement in that room, it was probably the best 30 minutes. I have nothing against what was going on here. I heard it was great, but the 30 minutes, it was truly remarkable. And do we need more of that? I mean, I'm just asking, what do you
Those are 64 people that have expanded their horizons about what their potential can be. That's wonderful. And they got plenty of potential. But, people are a product of what they're taught early on and all of that. And until many people, and particularly true historically in terms of females and blacks, they were just told they had a limited horizon. My sisters, just as smart as I am, they were born around 1930 on either side of it. They were told, not by words particularly, but just it was an invisible message, that they could be a nurse, a stenographer, maybe a retail clerk, but they couldn't have dreamt about what I was dreaming about.
Yeah.
And it was pathetic. It was unfair. And we're making progress all the time on that. But those 64 people we saw today, they have a different picture of themselves than they had 12 or 13 weeks ago. And they will have a different picture a year and 5 years from now too. Human potential is incredible.
No question. A horse that can count to 10 is a remarkable horse, not a remarkable mathematician.
Right. Samuel Johnson, I think, said that.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
But what, did you say it? Did you say Samuel Johnson, or I just told you? Better.
Yeah,
did you use that quote in that term ever? Because did you ever use it? Did you ever repeat it? Do you want to read it right now?
No. Well, okay. I think maybe my partner Charlie Muggers explained that to me.
Okay.
So there's a lot of things. I've gotten a lot of wisdom from other people. You want to hang around smart people and hang around people that are better than you are, which has not been difficult for me. You want to marry somebody better than you are, for that matter. I mean, you will move in the direction of the people you hang around with. And I've had some wonderful teachers.
Let's talk about the education system. And you know, again, I don't know, you seem to know and read about everything, so I assume you have some view of it. But in Detroit, particularly here, we've had these challenges for decades in the education system. Anything, just big sweeping thought you think that we should do differently, whether it's charter, whether it's public, or is there anything different thematically that
it's really, educational system in the United States are really difficult to change. I mean, they're local, they're unionized in many cases, sometimes they're underfunded, although the funding is really pretty huge. I mean, we spend almost $12,000 per kid per year on 50 million kids in the United States. So we spend the money. But I'm almost a fanatic on having a good public school system. And
was there anything that, I'm sure you've seen, there's a lot of ideas and a lot of good groups all around.
Yeah.
Is there anything that, maybe there is, usually it's not just one thing.
Well, no, and I think actually, my daughter's very involved in this. As she runs a foundation which I help fund. Is getting started very early. I mean, the kid that has been parked in front of a TV set for 5 years before they get to kindergarten, while nobody's there really, basically, and does not have the same shot as my kid's going to have. I mean, the vocabulary you pick up, everything contributes so much to your learning over life. So you really have to go back as far as you can and try and give everybody an equal shot. And overall, I was a product of the public school system, and all my kids, my grandchildren, there's never been a Buffett in Omaha that's gone to a private school. But it should be the concern, not just of every parent, but every citizen that you have one. And I think there's a lot of money being spent. Eli Broad was here. He's done a lot working in that area. The Gates Foundation, which I support, has done a lot. I mean, we've got to figure out what works best, and then the hard part will be implementing it, perhaps. Yeah. There's great resistance to change.
Yeah. Let's shift over to the Giving Pledge. So, Giving Pledge is something I believe you and Bill Gates decided. How did that happen first? How did it start?
It's about 5 years ago. We were talking, Bill and Melinda and I, and we got the idea first of calling David Rockefeller and seeing if he'd get together a little dinner in New York for some people. And Mayor Bloomberg was there, and David hosted it, and Eli Broad was there with Edie, and Julian Robertson, Oprah Winfrey. We had about 15 of us, and I asked people. I started at one part of the table, and I asked people just to talk about their philosophy of giving, not necessarily what they particularly did, but why do it, and how do they think about it. It took 2.5 hours to get around the table, and I knew we had something then that it was something that a lot of wealthy people, some people they become wealthy sort of, and all of a sudden they discover they're wealthy and they really haven't thought about what they do with their money.
Warren, tell everybody just what it is in general. I'm not sure everybody totally.
Oh, yeah, well, the pledge, then what the pledge came out of this was we organized this group, which now has 127 members, and these are people, and we worked on billionaires, and we asked them to morally pledge, not legally pledge, but morally pledge they will give away at least half of their net worth during their life or at death. And I have been very pleasantly surprised, as I've called a lot of people, and Bill's called more than I've called, and we have gotten 127 people with.
What's your batting average? Like,
well,
120, what's the denominator?
It was pretty good, but the most. Every now and then somebody tells me, all of these people have got $1 billion, at least according to Forbes, and some of them say, I'm not sure I can do it, and so I think there's a market for a book I'm going to write, which is going to be called How to Get By on 500 Million. I mean, there are a lot of people out there, don't laugh at these people. They're out there wrestling with that problem, apparently.
That's why I asked.
But the batting average.
Yeah, what's the batting average?
The batting average was pretty high initially. It's less high as we go along because we've had most of the people that either agreed with us initially or quickly came around to it. But some people they've changed their minds on it and
Changed their mind positive.
in a positive direction, yeah. And
You didn't have anybody ever say okay, and then but by the way, I'm only going to go with 40%.
no, but I've got plenty of people that just don't want to do it.
Yeah.
But we've turned it, I mean, it's more than what I've just described because we have a meeting every year. We have learning sessions on different subjects like education. The idea is that we can learn from each other. People are often very interested in how different families handle it. They wonder, should I bring my kids into this? How will they feel about it? And particularly if they've inherited a lot of money themselves, they wonder if they're sort of breaking a covenant with the past if they don't pass it all on because it got passed on to them. So there's all kinds of questions come up. And we try to have various sessions that address that. And we had, at this last meeting we had a very well-known fellow who's a very smart guy, and he talked about his mistakes in philanthropy, which I think is, it's helpful to people. So it's been productive so far. We ask people to write letters as to why they do this, and if you go to givingpledge.org, you can read all these letters, and I think those letters will have an effect 10 and 50 and maybe 100 years from now in terms of what other people of wealth do with their money.
I mean, what's great about it is the more people that do it, it really gives the right message to people who have accumulated wealth or inherited it.
I've had 2 people travel from South Africa to see me in Omaha, just solely for the purpose of talking about it and talking about the problems they might have, how the situation might be different there and all of that. One of them joined the Giving Pledge, and he and his wife, and I mean, so it's having an effect around the world even, and it's certainly having an effect in the United States, and we have a good time doing it.
And the Gates Foundation, which is the vast majority of your wealth, where it's being left, correct?
Committed to it, yeah.
Committed to.
Yeah.
How do they determine where they're going to allocate?
Well, their basic principle, and this is why I've joined with them, is that every human life is of equal value. Now, that can lead you a lot of ways, but they start out with that premise. That's what they want their giving to embody, that belief. And that focuses them pretty heavily on improving health throughout the world, because for a very limited amount of money, you can cause a lot more people to live a lot better lives, or just to be alive at all around the world. We don't preach any particular philanthropy. If somebody wants to give it to X, Y, or Z, God bless them. I mean, but
so, like, if a city, for instance, had half the amount of money needed for blight removal, or something like that, would they go? No, I'm really serious. Would they make a pitch to a foundation like that, like the Gates Foundation?
I think most foundations, including Gates, because the demands would be unlimited.
Oh, for sure.
And you would always be listening to the friends of friends and all of that sort of thing.
Yep.
So they try to define their areas of interest. And when you get up to the size of Gates, will give away close to $4 billion this year. You really have to have your interests defined. You have to have a certain number of people specializing it. You have to have some people checking to make sure that what you thought was going to happen actually does happen. I mean, it becomes a pretty big business, and it can't really listen to individual.
Yeah.
Now my sister does. I have a sister that's 86 now. She's called the Sunshine Lady. She spends all day, every day, giving away money retail. It would drive me crazy.
So giving away
I'm a wholesale guy.
Wholesale's a lot easier.
But she's got a group of sunbeams, as she calls them.
Yep.
It's a scream. You can make a movie about it. But they do a terrific job.
Let's just say, so the way some of us are characterized in Detroit, we have blight, crime, education, and jobs. I mean, that's pretty much the big 4.
And jobs are the most important.
Correct. And is it unprecedented that a city, well, it's unprecedented a city our size has gone through a bankruptcy, but that they would make a case to hit X amount of foundations, not individually, like you're saying, retail, but the whole list, whether it's education, whether it's in the jobs part, whether it's in the blight part. Is that something, do you think, that would have a chance of success?
It's usually going to work better with local philanthropists like the Kellogg Foundation or somebody like that. I mean, you'll find
Education.
most foundations, either they have some very broad topic,
Yep.
like global health or something of the sort, or they tend to be very localized.
Right. What about in the education? Is education some of the...
Well, education is something that I would say a very significant percentage of big philanthropists are trying to look at ways to get it done better. So they're willing to do experimental things in this city or that city. They're looking to create an example which then can be extrapolated throughout the society.
Yeah. So one of the things we sort of talked about of the things is because they do an annual meeting, the Giving Pledge, having them come to Detroit and do an annual, because they're doing an annual meeting anyway, and that'd be something that I don't know, that maybe we could talk. What do you think? Just give it a shot or something. I'll make the
Yeah, when you give something a shot, it usually happens.
Yeah, just give it a shot. So just to, 'cause to expose people to Detroit, the good and the bad, of course, like people are doing here in this room. I have a couple last things. We got about 6 minutes here. You said that, unless I got somebody else's quote here, which you never know, okay? The most important thing to do if you find yourself in a hole is to stop digging.
That is certainly true.
Okay. So is there when you now is that your quote?
No.
Oh, seriously?
I steal them all.
Okay.
No, I've got a few original.
Well, when did you say it? Did you say it under certain circumstances? Did something precipitate that happening?
Yeah, I've seen not only in business but in a lot of other areas that people persist in doing something where the evidence really shows it's nuts. It was Santayana that said, fanaticism consists of redoubling your efforts when you've forgotten your aim. And you see a lot of people doing that sort of thing. You should have checkpoints on anything. And it's best if you determine the criteria for those checkpoints well before you reach the checkpoint. Otherwise, you'll just start readjusting. You'll shoot the arrow and then you go out and paint the bullseye around wherever the arrow lands.
So how are you doing? You're 80, just turned 84?
84.
I mean, that's
84.
truly remarkable, and I'm not just saying this because I'm up here with Warren
I'd rather be a
Buffett.
little more remarkable, maybe at 90 or something.
But I mean, not a lot of 84-year-olds have everything going like you have it going. I mean, your mind and your hearing and everything. So is there anything you think in your life that you do that keeps you so young for an 84-year-old?
Well, I get to do what I love to do every day with people I love. I mean, it couldn't be any better. I mean, imagine if I was retired, and I spent all week planning my haircut. Yeah, that would. I think I do. Pretty fast. No, I think if you can find something, and there could be a lot of other things besides business, but that you can be passionate about, it's going to do wonders for you. I mean, and I do think, I've been so lucky in life that I've got nothing to complain about. But life is a lot of fun, and I've got wonderful friends.
Have you always had this much fun? It just seems like maybe you've been having a lot more fun lately, or is it?
No,
have you always had this much fun?
I've always had. Yeah, well, I went through a period. When I went through a period in my early teens when I was totally maladjusted, but I blame that on various other things, of course. but I would say, well, actually, my first wife straightened me out. I mean, she put me together. I was a mess going into that, but she put me together, and I was very, very lucky that way.
How have you dealt with everywhere you go, the fame, internationally known face personality? How is that for you? Is that bad, good, both? I mean, how have you handled? Is it?
There's not much. There's really no downside. Ran into somebody the other day. The guy said, "You look a lot like Warren Buffett." And I said, "A lot of people tell me that." And he said, "Does it piss you off?"
That's good. How did you answer that question?
There's not much downside to it.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you what, Warren. So there's 3 minutes left. I want to know. I did this. I had our technology guys do this quick little exercise because I know you're getting on a plane. You're going back to Omaha.
Yeah.
And so I figured that we very, very grateful and thankful that you came here both this morning and today. Really appreciate it. And we know that our governor and our mayor, could use a little bit of the Oracle of Omaha's touch. So I tried this. I don't know if it's going to work. So we took Mike Duggan, the mayor Mike Duggan, and if we took Mike Duggan, the mayor, and we combined him, or do I click this myself, you guys? Is that what I'm doing? Okay, then we combined them with Warren Buffett through this magical technology just to see if they can hang on to a little bit of you. We can create actually a mayor here by the name of Warren Duggan. What do you think?
He'll never get elected.
No? Okay. I mean, look at that. Then we could actually do the same thing with the governor for the heck of it. We take Rick Snyder, Warren Buffett, and just so they can hang on a little bit of you both at the state and the city level, we can create here the new governor, which would be Warren Snyder.
If you're going to do this for real, I'd like to make a suggestion or two.
So, I just want to thank you very much.
Been a lot of fun.
It's been a pleasure. And if there's one parting word for Detroit and Detroiters, or the folks here who have so nicely come into town and are engaged about the future of this city, last parting advice.
Well, I just say, like Freddy Krueger, I'll be back.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you. Great.
Okay.